Today we welcome a book that Alexander Payne, the Oscar-winning writer as well as the director of Sideways, said this book is account of Sideways and its reverberations is so thorough that even I learned things I hadn't known, which is something to say. It's a delightful, accurate chronicle with wine tips. High praise from an accomplished director. Kirk Honeycutt is a longtime film critic, journalist, teacher, and author who wrote the biography of John Hughes. That was a lot of movies of my childhood. John Hughes, A Life in Film. He was a senior reporter and then chief film critic for the Hollywood Reporter for 20 years. And before that, for the Los Angeles Daily News. May it rest in peace. He has contributed to the New York Times, the LA Times, Newsday, the San Francisco Chronicle, and magazines including Cosmo and American Film. And he taught several film courses at Chapman University at Dodge College of Film and Media Arts. Please welcome Kirk Honeycutt. And his partner, Mira Advani Honeycutt, has more than 25 years of experience in wine as a wine journalist. Presently, she is the wine editor at 13 Stars Media. Her monthly column, Sip and Savior, continues in the Paso Robles Press magazine. She is a regular contributor to the Somme Journal, the Tasting Panel, Sommelier Indian Wine Magazine, and the Napa Valley Register. Her articles on wine and film have been published in the Hong Kong Tatler, the Hollywood Reporter, and Los Angeles Magazine. Welcome, Mira.
Thank you.
Before I have you take it away, I do have to ask, how did you two meet?
That's the second time that's been asked in the week up here, down here in Santa Barbara area.
Nobody's asked us whether this is the second
That's funny.
time.
It's the second time because we were at the Garagese Festival in Solvang last weekend, and that's what Stu McLennan, who did the panel, asked us. So you tell the story.
Well, you start first, and I'll.
Well, I'll tell you. It's interesting because it's the title of a movie, How We
Yes.
Met. And I didn't know that until I told Kevin Thomas, who was then the LA Times film critic, how we met. And he said, "Oh, there's a movie starring Clark Gable and Rosalind Russell called They Met in Bombay."
Because that's what we would say when people would ask us, where did
We
you
met
meet?
in Bombay.
We said we met in Bombay. Well, now it's called Mumbai.
Now, the movie was shot in Culver City in the back lot, so they didn't get as far. We're closer to Bombay, I think, than there. But and it's not a very good movie because we rented it. We got it. It was back in the days of videotape. Remember videotape?
Yeah.
And we used the jacket cover for our wedding invitation because it was done, even though it's a black and white movie, it was done in color, and your daughter helped out.
Yeah, so the cover has Clark Gable and Rosalind Russell, it's their names on top, and says they met in Bombay. And so I told my daughter Rishika, I said, take my picture looking here, take this picture, and we did the cutout. We pasted it on the video jacket, and we put our names, and so, and I took it to, in those days, used to be a printing shop called Kinko's. I mean, this is really going back late 90s.
This is before Photoshop.
Yeah, and they just made up a nice little invitation, and I'm thinking, oh, this is the cheapest and the coolest invitation. It costs very little. But anyway, so we met in Bombay, and we had a common friend. And he was traveling. Tell them why you were traveling to Bombay. Yeah, what took you to Bombay?
I was escaping from creditors. And, no, things used to be done in style in those days with the press, the media. The Cannes Film Festival is in May, and the Hollywood Reporter had a major presence there because they put out a newspaper. It started as a mimeograph, then it became a proper newspaper for about 10 days or so during the festival, and that required a lot of people there. And so I was there as a reporter back in, 1995 or something like that. And a kind of a lunatic journalist friend of mine who worked for the Braver said, we have a business class ticket, and it probably, for the same amount of money, if we fly back to LA, we could probably fly around the world. So he spent a long time with travel agents and putting together a trip that went to India, to Singapore, and Hong Kong as our way of coming home. And we were in, I'm going to just say Bombay, Bombay, because I prefer that. We were in Bombay I was actually got there about a day or two ahead of him, because he still had work to do at the closing of the festival. So I was there hanging out in the Nataraj Hotel, not totally changed now. And Francesca Hilton said we should get
Yeah,
together.
we had a common friend, and she knew I was going visiting Bombay to see my mother, who was there at the time. We didn't pick a good time because it was the start of the monsoon season. It was beginning to rain, pretty muggy. And so my friend, she said, oh, he's going to be there a couple of days, you'll be there, just take him around, show him Bombay. And I said, all right, okay. And then so we met, our book should have been a film critic and a wine writer meet in a bar, because that's where we met. And so I said, oh, come to the Polo Lounge. No, sorry, it's like the Polo Lounge, sorry, the Harbor Bar, but it's like the Polo Lounge of LA. And so we met there, and we realized we had a lot of common friends in LA. How come we didn't meet in LA? We meet in Bombay. So that
Anyway,
was
that's why we got together.
And then we
I
got
immediately
back-
proposed writing a book with her. No, that was quite a few years before.
And then we got married actually in the Santa Ynez area, actually in Los Alamos, and at a small winery. Bedford Thompson was called in those days. Now it's just a Bedford winery in Los Alamos. Just a little shack. You came. It was years ago.
I remember.
Just a little shack of a tasting room, vineyards all around, very rustic, a big tree in the middle, and we had our Indian caterers come from LA, and we had Indian music, and saris hanging all around as decor, because it was just truly rustic, So we really got married in this region, and here we are, So,
Wow.
It was 25 years ago.
So prior to this book, have you two collaborated before? Is this your first collaboration?
This is the first,
Yeah.
and maybe the only, because it's hard to find where wine and film would intersect.
Yeah.
Again, in any important way, because what is phenomenal about Sideways and the so-called Sideways effect is that it is the only film I know of that had tremendous repercussions for a completely different industry. You can look at other times where there is a momentary jump in some interest in music because of a music. What was the film that Tar?
Oh yeah, Tar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was jumps on Spotify, and some of the music that was played in that.
Yeah.
I think it was Mahler, and there might have been some Tchaikovsky. I'm not sure. There was jumps for a few months, and when Game of Thrones came out, there were a few meaderies. Mead, they drink a lot of mead there. There was a few meaderies in the country, and according to Smithsonian Magazine, it quadrupled afterwards. When people started watching it, people wanted to drink mead. So that's a kind of an effect. But this one affected quite a few things. It affected this region, because nobody knew about this being a wine region before. It was always in everybody's head, Napa and Sonoma. To this day, there was a writer in the LA Times a year ago had did a Paul Giamatti interview and said it was been 20 years since Paul Giamatti and Thomas Hayden Church were romping around Napa Valley. 20 years later, he still doesn't
Oh my God.
understand that this is not Napa Valley here. So it's still a common perception that things took place. It must have been Napa Valley. Where else could it have been?
Yeah.
But a lot of people understood it was Santa Barbara, and people came here. Then there's the effect on Pinot Noir
Yeah, and Merlot.
and Merlot.
Let's not forget
And
that.
finally, just the wine industry in general, all over this country, because there's a winery in every state of this nation. I haven't had Alaskan wine yet, but I'm sure it's good. And so that's what the book is trying to chart, how it affected not only the movie business and the independent movie business, because it was an independent movie that ended up in 1,800 theaters. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. But it did. And then the careers of everybody involved, especially the actors, who were pretty unknown at the time, not to film critics, but to just about everybody else. So that's what the book is, looking at that intersection.
I'm going to ask Mira about wine in just a sec, but I wanted to ask you, Kirk, as far as what do you attribute to longevity, the staying power of this movie as a critic, as a film critic? What did you find appealing, and why do you think it's lasted and been endeared for so long?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because when I saw it at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it had its world premiere back in 2004, I gave it a rave review, and so did just about everybody there. And then I went to the New York Film Festival and got rave reviews there, and across the board. But I don't think any critic with any sanity would say 20 years from now it'll be more important than it was. No one would have ever guessed that. So what did make it stay? And I've been asked that question. I think a lot of it has to do, number one at least, with the wine background, because it wasn't what everybody was. Wasn't why Alexander Payne wanted to make a wine movie. You know, he just wanted to make a movie about these characters that came from a book, and he had an idea how to do it. And it happens to be about guys going wine tasting and getting into some trouble and mischief. But I think people really glommed on to the fact that there was a background to it that was interesting. Then the two main characters, the two men, were just kind of the Mutt and Jeff characters. There was just something really interesting about those two guys. Even though you're appalled sometimes at the things they were doing, they're not going to do that. They're going to do that. So, do you have any insights?
Well, I think the characters were very relatable. I mean, when we talk to people, they go like, "Oh, I know a friend who's like
Jack.
Jack.
Yeah.
Oh, my brother's like Jack."
They always say it's Jack. It's never
Jack.
Miles.
Yeah. No, but there was Dave Congleton,
The radio guy. Yeah.
the radio talk show host. Radio. He said, "I really relate to Miles' character, a failed writer. I can relate to that." So they were relatable, and they were like you and me. Like you could have a drink with these friends, or you could have a picnic with them. You could meet them for lunch some weekend or something. They were characters, and they just looked like you and me, kind of. You know, I mean, they were beautiful, all of them, but they weren't dressed to the hilt, the hair and makeup. And in fact, when Virginia Madsen went for audition to Alexander Payne, he said, "You've got the role, but no makeup. You're going to wear no makeup." And she was happy. She said, "Then I can sleep in an hour late. I don't have to go for hair and makeup, you know." He said, "You're a waitress in Gilton, you know? It's a small town. It's a family. You don't want to wear makeup." She was happy. So it felt like we know these people, you know. And I think one of the reasons, people always mention, "Oh, is there going to be a sequel?" No, Alexander Payne said no sequel. And I think one of the reasons for is the fact it's a classic. It's an American classic, and it's because there's no sequel. It is what it is. It doesn't drag on, and then you kind of water down everything. You know?
Yeah.
You know, he knocks on the door. People always want to know what happened to them. Well, you guess.
to you.
You know, it's up to you.
Yeah.
So all these things were, and also I think, and nothing to do with longevity of the film, but it just kind of opened up the landscape of wine tasting, the tasting rooms, the familiarity, and you can walk in there and not know anything about it and make it user-friendly. I think it just really opened the floodgates to that.
Yeah, that's a world people didn't really know.
Yeah, they didn't know.
Here in Santa Barbara, you may, because you have the Ombo Clement testing room right downtown where we did a book signing a while ago. And what a lovely spot. I'd never been there before, so that's one of the great things about
And there was
this
no
tour.
funk zone at the time.
Yeah.
Talk about
The
Santa
funk zone
Barbara.
wasn't there, no, just
You
the
know.
Santa Barbara winery.
But it just made it user-friendly.
Yeah, it made people less. It took away the snobbish aspect to wine, and it became just this thing. You can go in there, and people pour you wine, and your opinion is as good as anybody else's. And I think it got people a little more inclined to order wine at dinner and in restaurants, and also to go to some wine tasting rooms, because they're all over the country.
Yeah, and it also introduced Pinot Noir in a more broader way. Now, Pinot Noir was always there, you know, but more and more people go, okay, all right, let's try this, you know. So it just shifted the whole culture of wine.
Along that lines, Mira, as far as the effect that it had on Pinot Noir and Merlot as well, you know, what kind of influence did this movie? It was a substantial interest.
Huge. I mean, we talked about things influencing, you know, movies like Sex and the City, the TV show. Shoes, expensive Malone Blahnik shoes. All the girls want to go out and get them. So suddenly there was a fashion of everybody had to, whether you could wear them or not, they were very uncomfortable, but you had to have them, right? But it lasted a few years. This has lasted so long. And then to turn the Merlot industry on its head, I mean, literally, Merlot tanked. It just tanked.
Interesting.
And it took years for it to recover. It is now, as I say, it's getting respect now, you know. Yeah, kind of, you know. But there's some really good Merlots.
Oh no, there really is.
Yes,
No, I'm very upset about the Merlot industry
you're
going
upset,
down.
exactly, because there was a lot of
Pinot went up, Merlot went down, and Pinot, I had a Pinot phase, but I don't know, I like Merlot better now.
What? That's good to know. That's good to know. If we had a wine tasting here today, I would have said, okay, let's do Pinot and Merlot.
You know, those
You know.
two grapes kind of grow in the same climates, and they're kind of sister grapes in a way. I mean, they're not genetically related, but they're both kind of voluptuous kind of grapes, you know, and as opposed to say, like a cab, which is Cabernet, which is like, can be a what do they call it? Fist in a velvet glove or something like that.
Tannic, you know,
Yeah.
tannic and big wine. But so speaking of Merlot and Pinot, Pinot was just being discovered. A lot of Sons in LA and other restaurants, they knew Pinot. You know, people who love Burgundies, they know Pinot. I think Merlot just was, at that time, there was a lot of bad Merlot out there, by the glass. $6-8 a glass, you go to a bar, you go to a restaurant, go anywhere, you want a glass of red wine, they'll just give you Merlot. So there was a lot of bad Merlot out there, everybody and anybody. Similarly, there's a lot of bad Pinot out there now, because people are going, oh, you want Pinot? All right, we'll give you a $12 Pinot, $12 bottle Pinot.
Oh,
It doesn't exist, but it is there. It is there. You know.
interesting.
So, but Merlot houses in Napa, for instance, Trefethen, Duckhorn, Paulmeyer, Markham, they're known for their Merlot. They stood the test of time. They said it didn't bother us at all. You know, it's like good Merlot is good Merlot. You know, and what does Paul Giamatti drink in the end at the burger shop? He's got the Cheval Blanc, which is Merlot. You know, so but it just got rid of a lot of bad Merlot. But nobody understands the business of it. How did it happen? Alexander Payne says too. He says, I'm still scratching my head. Why did one line bring an industry down? So I think it's just the perfect storm. It was going down because it was just really not good. And Pinot was just coming up at the time. So it just could have been that. And the movie, just that one line, just boom, it resonated with everybody.
Wow.
You know,
So
nobody can understand though. It's still, you know, Merlot producers are going like, we still don't understand.
Well, we do have some people, winemakers in our book,
Yeah.
saying that they think that was the best thing that ever happened to Merlot, because the Merlot was pretty much junk in those days, and this weeded all that out.
Yeah.
It got rid of all that, and now the Merlot that's being produced is pretty stellar.
Very good.
So they feel,
Yeah.
one, Adam Lazar said, I hope it never goes back to
Right.
to what it was,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
did us a favor, because it
Yeah.
just, I had friends, I would taste their wines, this is terrible. I said, I know, but we just stick Merlot on the name and it just sells.
So now that's happening now.
And so they ripped out a lot of Merlot. Merlot's sales didn't actually decrease that badly. It was more self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
We had a professor who studies these things said, if someone yells fire, people rush out, but that isn't, if there's no fire, it's a false narrative. And he said it was a false narrative that it actually plummeted. It didn't plummet. It was heading down, it went down a little more. Pinot Noir was heading up, but it actually wasn't increasing that much after the movie. So they were both false narratives in terms of empirical evidence. They're just, you don't see that big a switch, but it was enough in people's minds that they started changing their viticulture.
Yeah.
Strange
I
things
think-
happen.
Yeah, and newcomers to wine at the time, they just learned the word Pinot Noir. Okay,
Yeah.
let's try it. you know, people just getting into it, and they liked it. So it's just reverberated right through the country. How it impacted every restaurant, every bar, and winemakers, you know, growers. Yeah. But it's coming back. There's some really good Merlot, even in Central Coast, Paso Robles, where we live. There's some really good Merlot producers there. Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. How did you construct it? And, you know, you've talked to vintners.
Yeah.
How did you put together and how did you work together by doing this?
But his room is upstairs. I'm downstairs. So
Okay,
that's,
okay.
Let's get to that.
Well, yeah, we did all things on Zoom because we don't live in Los Angeles. We live in the Central Coast. And it just made no sense to try and reach all these people. Paul Giamatti lives in Brooklyn. Alexander Payne, yes, he does live in LA, but he was spending most of his time in Omaha because his mother had turned about 100, 101, and he was minding her as she passed on maybe within the last year. But he was spending a lot of time with her, and he was also promoting a new movie he had coming out called The Holdovers, and having to go to Europe for that. And so he was always hit. He wanted to come to Paso. He still never has. But so it was all Zoom. Thomas Hayden Church lives in Texas, by the way. So it was Zoom, and we would do the interviews together. I would transcribe them because Zoom has this wonderful feature where you can record. And we got transcripts of everything, and then I kind of broke down the film. I knew I wanted to do things about Santa Barbara County and what it was like before Sideways, but how it got there, going back to the 19th century. We had a lot, and you had a lot of writing on this already, so we used some of that.
Previous writings, you know, of Central Coast,
Yeah.
We had
interviews with people.
visited Burgundy once, twice in fact, and I used that material, and we worked on a whole chapter on just Burgundy to try and get Pinot Noir into this, to try and, why is everybody so crazy about Pinot Noir originally in the novel, written by Rex Pickett, and then in the movie, written by Alexander Payne and his partner, Jim Taylor, who was his old UCLA college roommate. So they write most of their films together, and did, as you say, won the Oscar for best adapted screenplay. So it's a Pinot-centric. The novel even more so is Pinot-centric. If you actually look at the movie, they don't drink that much Pinot.
Yeah.
You think they do, but they don't. And the most famous scene about Pinot Noir, they're sitting on a back porch of Stephanie's home, and she's asking him, Maya's asking Miles, why are you so into Pinot Noir? And he goes on to this soliloquy, then she has her soliloquy about how much she loves wine, and the people that made it maybe years ago, and what are they drinking? Andrew Murray Syrah.
Syrah from here. Andrew Murray.
So they're, and then when they meet Stephanie, they're drinking Cab Franc.
Yeah.
And he's
And it's
disparaging it.
Blanc.
And God knows what they're drinking at the Fraz tasting room. Does
Yeah.
anybody recognize what that tasting room actually is? You remember Fraz Canyon tasting room where he does the dunk bucket scene?
Is it the Hitching?
That's
It's a
Fess Parker.
Fess Parker. But they
Yeah.
changed the name.
Well, they changed the name because they wanted to disparage the wine, and you want to disparage a man's wine. And actually, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But they were kind of taking a Mickey out of him for
Yeah.
the kind of, the lavish T-shirts and the baseball hats and all the
music and the
paraphernalia
fountains
that go.
and,
That has nothing to do
it
with
was
wine.
more about entertainment, you know.
But they made it Fraz, so it weren't disparaging Fess Parker.
Yes, yeah.
So he came up with Fraz, and Fraz, by the way, means insect poop. So that was a little inside joke that he threw in.
In what language?
Yeah,
He likes his inside jokes.
right. But yeah, they're all drinking all different kinds of wines from this area, you know. And yeah, the only time you actually see them drinking Pinot is in the Los Libos Cafe dinner. And they have Kistler from Sonoma, and they have other Pinots, Burgundies. So-
Omar or something.
Yeah, so they do, you know, they show bottles, you know.
Yeah. If they drank all the bottles they showed in that scene, they would be under the table in no time.
And a lot of wine on the set was real actual wine, and good wine.
Oh.
Well, it became a problem because Alexander Payne said, I don't want wine that looks like high C grape juice. I want it to look like what it should look like.
Right.
So the prop master was able to come up with wine that looked like Pinot Noir or Syrah or whatever it might be, but it made the actors sick. It was just kind of juices and chemicals and oh god. And
Yeah, you can drink that.
became a problem, and so he said, have them drink wine.
Yeah, red wine.
So
Yes.
Paul Giamatti in the scene you just referenced said by the end of the second night he was pretty smashed. He doesn't remember what he did.
Making mistakes on purpose, so you have to retake.
Well, that is a very tough. If I might say, that's the key scene in the movie, but it's also the toughest scene for an actor to do is that. And it was Sandra Oh who was sitting opposite him pointed out how good he was in that scene. If you think about, you all know the scene I'm talking about, where the four go out on a double date.
Yeah.
And they go to the Los Olivos Cafe, and they reconfigured the cafe so that the restaurant part is sitting in front of the wall of wine. The set director and Alexander Payne liked the wall of wine, even though in reality, if you've ever been there, the restaurant's on a separate side. They're nowhere near it. So they put them next to that wine wall, and three actors are having, and a little ad-libbing too, having a good evening, a nice, pleasant, flirtatious evening. He, that afternoon, the character he's played, has just learned that his ex-wife has remarried. Just learned it. And he is absolutely in a tizzy. And remember, don't drink and dial. He went back and dialed her on the phone. So he's going through a meltdown. At the same time, all the other ones are trying to have a good time. So he's got all these things where he's trying to interact with Maya, who he's interested in, but his mind is on something entirely different, and he's getting less and less sober, let's put it that way. And it's real difficult for an actor to play at those various levels. And that's why he's such a good actor, that he did it. And Sandra Oh was sitting opposite, and she said, I was just in awe of what he was doing, both his technique and his emotions. I've never seen that before. And she said afterwards, Alexander, do you realize what you just got on tape, on film? It's just amazing. He's such a good actor. And the sad thing is, he didn't even get nominated for an Oscar. He won all the Spirit Awards, he won all the Critic Awards, he won awards, not nomination, awards. The Oscars, there was a late Clint Eastwood movie came in, and the theory is that film knocked him out as the number 5th pick. He probably wouldn't have won the Oscar, but he at least should have been nominated.
Yeah. With the other two actors.
It was $1 Million Baby, and which was a good movie, but and Clint's great in it. But you know, you think about how that film has stood the test of time, and we've been meeting people who tell us how many times they've seen it.
Yes.
But we met the all-time champion of this, where some woman came to us at the Palm Theater in San Luis
San
Obispo
Luis,
and says, I see this 3 times a month.
yeah. Every month since 2010. Since well, not drinking, just watching the
No.
movie.
Well, maybe at home, because
Yeah.
it's mostly been
Oh, at home.
streaming. You don't.
Yeah, at home or screenings, you know, when they came to a screening. But I said that over 10, 12 years, been watching it. I think she said twice a month. But even twice a
Well,
month.
even twice a month
But
is.
every month.
Wow.
Well, we met someone in Napa who was so obsessed about the movie that the first screening and appearance we made was at Napa
Copia.
CIA, not the CIA, Culinary Institute of America,
And
not
Copia.
the people in Washington. Culinary Institute of America at Copia. And Alexander Payne was there for a screening, and Frank Ostini of the Hitching Post was there to cook. So it was a food and film event. And somebody was there who had seen the film the night before, because Rex Pickett had a screening over in Sonoma Valley. So he was on his second film that night. But he was going around trying to find out the location for every shot in the movie. Why you want to do this, I
All
don't know.
around
But he
Savannah.
did
Every street, every
everything.
address, every shop.
He was down to only one location he couldn't figure out.
Yeah.
Because after that porch scene, the cars go down a hill, it's dead of night, one car goes one way, one car goes another way, and there was the same shot a few nights later when they both went together. he asked Alexander, where was that? And Alexander said, I have no idea. I don't remember.
It's just a country road.
It's a country road. He doesn't know.
But he wants to know where the country road
But the obsession people have with the movie
know.
is something that
It's-
you can't pre-plan. You can't.
Yeah, we've heard some amazing, amazing stories, and how many times they've seen it, and we go on these tours. I mean, it's just this fascination. I mean, there's just this whole, I call it Sideways Fanatic Club, and it's all over the country. It's not just California.
Mhm.
You know.
How did you get the idea that a book like this?
The idea actually happened right again here in not Santa Barbara but in Santa Maria. We were
Yeah.
It was 2022 40th anniversary of Au Bon Climat, the winery. It's a big warehouse now. It's called Clendenin Lindquist Vintners. And we were at the party, and it was huge. There were so many people because in that winery, over close to about a dozen people make their wines. You know, small production. It's just like factory. But that's where Jim Clendenin's winery was, and he would have his luncheons with staff lunches every day. And we were there, and I'm like, this is really amazing. And it's Sideways has just opened the floodgates of so much happening here. Did we know this 20 years ago that this region is going to grow this big? I mean, we've been coming in, over the years.
And we
And-
just visited Frank Ostini's table.
He was
where
there.
from here to there are Pinot Noirs sourced from all kinds of
All
areas.
kinds of different vineyards and AVAs.
And this is a guy who, at the time the film was shot, he had a few thousand cases of wine.
Yeah.
He didn't think he was going to sell them.
Still.
He didn't know how to sell
Now
them.
he's into like multi-thousands, And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, this is something to be thought about. There's a book in it. Because there's been lots of stories written over the years, a journalistic story here or there, celebrating 10th anniversary, again talking about Pinot and Merlot, but there's no book written on it. And I said, it's a film book. This is yours, write it. And then the more we talked about it, it's a film and wine book, so, but he's done the heavy lifting. He's done all the film writing, which, I'm not. I mean,
Yeah, there's bottle shots even that we've done in
Yeah.
color
So
because
then we thought, we talked to the
we
vintners
talked
here.
about these wines, and she has selected wine. Well, there's the dump bucket scene. She has selected wines from various wine regions that not too expensive because Pinot can get pretty pricey.
Yeah.
And so nearly every chapter has a thing in the back where it's just a special section highlighting our picks for good wineries to get your Pinot Noir from, and Merlot. There's
Yeah.
also an area for Merlot.
Yeah, no, we
And-
pay homage to Merlot for sure.
Yeah. So we've turned it into a bit of a wine book too because we felt that's what the story should be.
Yeah.
It should be about
Yeah.
both things
Mhm.
because it had such a serious impact on wine that one winemaker said to us, these things go in cycles every 10 years. Oh, it's Chardonnay, then it was Syrah. Then this thing went in 3 months. The cycle was 3 months. It was that short. It was just suddenly the demand was so intense, especially in this area,
Yeah.
that they were running out of wine. They literally were running out of wine, and they realized they could make a lot more Pinot Noir. The market was opening up then, but it not.
Yeah,
to
but
this degree.
slowly, it was just gradually just on the rise.
Probably 20
Early
years now, if it hadn't been a big hit, I think Pinot would probably be a pretty solid entry on every
Yeah.
menu
But not
and
in
in wine
this manner,
stores.
not in such a big
But
way.
not this quickly.
Yeah,
not
not
this
this quickly. Yeah.
In fact, the downside of that is that there's a lot of bad Pinot out there now.
Yeah.
Or let's just say mediocre, not bad, but mediocre Pinot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have contracts for Pinot, and there's a glut of Pinot on the market. In fact, there's a glut of wine on the market right now.
And some of the winemakers I've heard from them, if I take a look at the Pinot, it's pretty dark for a Pinot. And they go like, we're making Pinot for Syrah drinkers. Because a lot of the American palate, they want a little bigger wine. They might like Pinot, but they want a big Pinot. It's like saying a jumbo shrimp. That's just an oxymoron. You don't have a big Pinot. Go get a big cab.
Well, they can. Some of them are okay. Some of
Yeah.
them, I understand
They're
it.
pretty dark, some of them, and
I get a good Pinot taste, and it's a very dark, rich wine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really shouldn't be. It should be a light wine, and a lot of people kind of dismissed it back in the day because it was so light.
Yeah. Yeah,
Two
right.
things have changed that. One is the guy who's trying to make it for a market, and so he makes it darker.
Yeah.
Two, climate.
Yeah.
Climate change,
Yeah,
I know it
climate
doesn't really
change.
happening, but it is happening, and the winemakers are struggling, and it's become an issue up in Oregon.
Yes,
Tell
we
about
noticed that. Yeah.
how we noticed the difference in
We did.
We went there 25 years ago, and then we went there last year.
Yeah. Much darker Pinots, but I mean they're good. They're still Oregon Willamette Pinots, you know, very earthy, mushroom, and really good. But I'm like, this is not the Pinot I remember some 20
So they don't
years.
dye it? It's
Sorry?
actually, they don't dye it, it's actually made darker?
No, but
No,
it's
the
the
climate
fruit.
has done
The
that
fruit,
Oh,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
fruit's just darker.
because it's
And a little bit more richer, you know? Yeah. I mean, it's this Pinot. It's really good Pinot.
they've
but
had
you-
heat spikes there.
And they have, yeah. So
And
the
they've
weather
had-
is so completely erratic. I mean, look what's happening now. I believe there's an earthquake in the LA area. So there are fires and floods and an earthquake. I heard somebody say, oh, there's an earthquake. Maybe it was 9/11. But and so the growers and winemakers have to go with what they get every year, you know. And it's so sometimes maybe the winemaking technique also differs because of the climate change.
It's even more dramatic in Burgundy. Burgundy, the problem in Burgundy was always used to be that it was so long ripening because of the coolness, and it just took forever to ripen. So they finally had to pick grapes, and in that country it is legal to chapitalize, which is to add sugar,
In France.
get up the alcohol so that you have a wine. And it was very light, very, very light, and they had to always add, almost every vintage, they would have to add some sugar. They never add sugar anymore. And it's getting to the point that a world-class somm can't really, a blind taste, tell a new world and an old world Burgundy wine,
It's
or noir,
cultivated.
because they have become so much more like, say, Willamette and California wines.
Yeah.
And it's really throwing off everything. And but one thing is they don't have to have sugar anymore.
That's good.
Wow.
So it's really climate's going to affect a lot of things. Because now in Bordeaux they're talking about adding different grapes
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
aren't they?
Some Portuguese grapes.
Portuguese
So
grapes.
that'll become
That'll be legal to
yeah,
use
legal.
as a Burgundian
Yeah.
grape. I mean, sorry, a
Bordeaux grape.
Bordelais grape.
Yeah.
Because the climate has so messed them up.
Wow.
But getting back to writing and how we kind of figured out who's doing what. Well, he was doing film, of course, and I was doing the wine. And then somebody asked her, how did you lay out the chapters? You know, because they have to flow with what was going on. And I think we kind of managed to make it flow from film, then to wine, and then to film and wine. So, and then at the end of each chapter, we have an AVA, about 8 California AVAs, and Willamette, New Zealand, and Burgundy's Côte d'Or. So a little bit about their AVA, and then the list of curated.
We're telling two stories here, but you kind of alternate back and forth. Once the film starts, then you have to get to the film, because it is about the making of a movie. And there's a lot of interesting backstories, which we haven't talked about. We were talking about a minute ago how relatable these actors were. How relatable would they be, and this is a trick question, if they were George Clooney and Brad Pitt? Because that's what CIA pitched them.
Right.
They could have had George Clooney and Brad Pitt play those two guys. I don't think they would be relatable. It'd be a funny movie, probably.
A good movie, funny
Because they
movie.
just did a movie together. What was
Yeah.
it called?
Wolves.
Wolves.
Yeah.
Some people didn't like it. We streamed it. It was on Netflix. It was fine. It was funny. I mean, you don't
And
take
they've been
it-
in the Oceans series,
Yeah.
and you know,
Yeah.
so many other
They're
films.
fine
yeah.
together. But then it'd be just Brad and George having a good time in Los Olivos. You know, and it would be a different movie. Probably a good movie, probably a successful movie, but we wouldn't be talking about it now. No way.
Probably not.
No way.
No.
It had to be
Yeah.
this schlumpy guy and this tall, rangy, crazy sexaholic, basically. And I have known people like that too. One was, in fact, the guy that was with us that day we met at the Harbor Bar at the Taj Hotel.
Right.
He was a very charismatic guy, but he was
Yeah.
also a very difficult man. He had trouble with alcohol
And women.
and women, and he
Yeah.
was, he was Jack. You know, and I had a roommate on my grand tour of Europe that was like that too. More women than chasing women than chasing dudes. I don't know what happened to him. He was like the son of an assistant commissioner of the New York subway system. But yeah,
You know,
I remember that
and
guy.
I ask women, you know, who come to our book signings or screenings, what do you feel? You know, because we're in a different age now, 20 years later, you know, and women love it. They say, we really love this film. You know, okay, two boys behaving badly, you know, okay, but women can relate to it totally, you know, because there is a love story there, you know, and yeah, so it's aging well, like good wine. You know?
I think so.
Have
Does
you
anybody
seen
have
other
any
Alexander Payne movies? I'm just curious.
Descendants?
Descendants, yeah.
That's the film he made after Sight.
Nebraska?
Oh, I love Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Yeah, it's
Wonderful.
one of
He's
my
a master, isn't he? It's just
Yeah.
See, I think he's always made, with one exception, very interesting and good movies. Just as good, but something about this movie, which even he can't quite define,
Yeah, he can't.
has become, well, he was there at the 20th anniversary. In fact, exactly on the same day it opened.
Yeah.
In, was it October 5th?
Westwood, they had a kind of
No,
a,
I was thinking of the one in Napa.
Oh,
that
yeah,
was the
October,
actual.
yeah,
We
yeah.
did, we said,
10th,
oh, it was the
October
12th of October.
12th, yeah.
That's the date it was released back in 2004,
Yeah.
and that wasn't an intentional thing. It just happened that way.
yeah.
And he's very pleased that this film has held up as well as it has.
Yeah.
Because other than maybe the cars you see in the background, it's
And the gas prices.
Oh, the gas prices.
Notice the gas prices, you see the $1.79. Right here in Buellton.
Kirk, what was the exception to the movies? You said
Oh,
except one exception, but you didn't say what the
yeah.
exception.
What was this film with?
Oh, with Matt
downsizing.
Damon. Matt Damon.
Downsizing with Matt Damon.
Yeah, that's the only one he said.
Oh,
He-
yeah.
That's the reason he didn't make a film for 8 years after Sideways. You think, boy, he couldn't be hotter and he doesn't make a film for 8 years. That's because he had this sci-fi idea of miniaturizing people for ecological reasons,
Yeah.
and a satire, a kind of a Swiftian satire. And he and his writing partner Jim Taylor worked on it for years, and they just couldn't get it into any kind of shape. So finally, he was so desperate to direct that he took The Descendants, which was going to be a Stephen Frears movie, but Stephen Frears backed out of it, and his company was producing it. He said, well, let me take a crack at it, because it wasn't the place he wanted to do it. So he did rewrite it so he could get a feel of it, and he went to Hawaii and he met the novelist who showed him around, and he understood the society a bit, just like he did with Sideways. He spent many months here trying to understand the people, because his first 3 films were made in Nebraska. Well, he knows Nebraska, he's from there. So he finally, after he made Nebraska, he decided to try and take a crack at the screenplay, and he shot the film with Matt Damon, and it just doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. And he now says, you know, nowadays we have series on Netflix. If this had been a series, it would have worked. I
Yeah.
think. Because there's too many things I'm trying to jam into a 2-hour movie, and it
Yeah.
just doesn't
It
fit.
didn't work, yeah.
You know, and
Unfortunately, yeah.
it would have worked maybe as a series. I don't know, but it could have been. He thinks it's an honorable failure. He's not as displeased with it as I am. I don't. But I mean, I did have to see it again to honestly write this book,
Yeah.
because we both looked at it again. I mean, it's a joy to watch his other films. It is. And this one was, yeah, it's work. It was work.
And
There's
Hollywood
there's wonderful moments in it.
Yeah.
Really, some good moments. You
Yeah.
see what he was trying to get at, but
I don't know where they were, but probably.
No, I thought there were some good moments, especially when that Asian actress came on. Halfway through the movie, a new actress suddenly just.
Yeah, she
And
was
suddenly the
good.
movie takes off and said, "Oh, she
She
should have
was-
been in much earlier."
Yeah, she
I
was
can't
good.
remember. She was one who got the Oscar nomination for what was the film about the guy who was very fat?
Brendan Fraser.
Brendan
Oh,
Fraser.
yes,
The
yes,
Whale.
yes, yeah, Brendan.
Whale.
The movie that he was in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
she
gosh.
was, yeah.
And he won.
He
Yeah,
won.
he won, and
right.
the
He
woman
was
was
wonderful.
nominated but didn't.
And
That
she
woman was in
supporting?
his
She's
film.
Yes,
I think
yes.
she's Korean or something.
Korean, yeah.
In any event, he was always sad that she didn't get an Oscar nomination for that work because, in fact, it was a very good job. It's just that, sometimes you get nominated for the wrong thing. Paul Giamatti finally got an Oscar nomination last year for a film he made with Alexander Payne. It's the first time they were able to team up again, which was The Holdovers. And in fact, Paul Giamatti was going to be, he was the one that they wrote the film for originally, the Downsizing. But it just didn't work in terms of the kind of budget they needed. They needed a star, they needed Matt Damon. And if you think about it, Matt Damon is a wonderful actor. I saw him in Oppenheimer. Just the amount of time he's on the screen, he was so powerful, so good. He's a great actor. He's not a comic actor. Paul Giamatti is, and I think you needed a comic actor in that role. I think it was just bad casting. That's my opinion as a critic.
Does anybody else have a question for Kirk or Mira?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I think what I like about the movie is the accessibility. Like you said, it sort of opens up the world of wine to people that maybe thought it was a sort of a rarefied world. And now you see it's the Sideways tour of Los Olivos or, the San Ynez Valley. There's actually those cars and vehicles I've seen since Sideways tours. So I think that's an amazing thing of what it did. But also, I think the timing is so interesting because you've had your career as a film critic. You had written a book on Central Coast wines prior to this. So
Right.
I'm just curious, at what point where does this convergence happen where just you've had so many years of writing about film and you've been writing about wine where you felt confidently okay, what was for each of you, what was just the thing that just made it click for you?
It was
It was
very organic. We never
and
sat
how
down.
tough was it?
Yeah.
Was it to come together and collaborate because this is the first time you've collaborated?
Here's the thing, people sit down, okay, now you write film, I write mine, let's do a book together. No, that never happened. It was just organic. The minute we were sitting there, I thought there was a book in it, I thought it was a film book. And the more we talked about, we realized this can be just a film book, it's a film and wine book, So it was just very in the moment, organic, and then we figured out, okay, how do we do it? I know I'm not going to write on film. That's your thing, and that's the heavy lifting of the book, as I say. And he knows about wine.
But
because
you wrote about film for the Hollywood Reporter when you
I
were.
did.
She came to the Cannes Film Festival.
I used to go to
and she
all-
got credentialed, but she
Yeah.
was so important to them they credentialed her.
Yeah, I used
She was
to.
another reporter, and I had to pay her way.
But I didn't critique the films, but I would do interviews with people like Woody Allen, people like Clint Eastwood and George Clooney, Brad Pitt. You cover parties and you cover.
Also, the Indian Pavilion. They,
And then
they
I
had
was
nobody
doing,
to cover
yeah.
Indian
So I was
films.
doing every year covering the India scene, the Indian film scene for the Hollywood Reporter. When I was in Berlin, I was covering also German stuff there. But just not critiquing, but just writing about the festival.
Yeah.
And also at Sundance. So yes, I was writing about film. I was going to all these film festivals, going to all these premieres and all. But I wouldn't think I could write critiquing, as in depth as he has done. Like a whole chapter on indie filmmaking, the historical stuff and all that. So that was his, and he knows about wine. We both like Pinot, obviously, and Merlot. And so it just, I don't know, the collaboration just happened. I don't think we sat down one day and thought, oh, okay, let's do a book together.
Well, I have to tell you, I had a great time writing it, helping to write that chapter on Pinot Noir.
Yeah,
Because I could talk about I could talk about Pinot Noir. I mean, I'm not a wine writer, and I never should be. If I did a wine book, it would have to be, admittedly, as an outsider doing it or something, which might not be a bad idea. Because there's too many wine geeks writing wine books, and they all kind of sound alike and taste. I don't know. I don't find. I go to the wine section of my library, and there's a book called Uncorked that was pretty good because about a journalist trying to see what it took to become a song. Now that was an interesting book, but most wine books are just. I mean, you have them for reference maybe, but you don't.
Yeah, and they work as reference. Yeah, you need.
But you know, so if I would write something, if I ever did, that I'd want people to read. But I had a good time writing that chapter on Pinot Noir because I'm trying to figure out why is it I love Pinot Noir. So I was just going through all kinds of literature about Pinot Noir and talking to people, and we talked to people up in Sonoma, and I don't know.
Richard Sanford. We had a great interview with Richard. Sanford. Wonderful.
Richard Sanford.
You know, it's such a legend.
And of course, we did know the late Jim Clendenin.
Yes.
Who was, he's, you know, there's always the people that founded a wine industry, like a Richard Sanford, but then there's the guy who went out and told the world about it, and that was Jim Clendenin. He traveled the world. He must have been on planes 200 days a year, going to Sweden and Japan and France and talking about Santa Barbara, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and California wines. He carried the flag for Santa Barbara, and he was so huge. In fact, I'm sorry he didn't have some kind of role in this movie. He certainly had him to lunch there at his famous lunches, and the two women, we have shots of them, not in the book, because we wouldn't have rights to it, but punching down the grapes during harvest. So you show them what that was like. That Sandro and Virginia Madsen. And Frank Ostini keeps that sign right in his tasting room. I mean, sorry, the photo right in his tasting room. But he was so instrumental in a way about this movie that we didn't quite dedicate it to him.
Well, so we just dug out all the old interviews that I'd had with him, and kind of bring them together because he passed away 4 years.
4 years ago.
But everybody was just delightful. Interviews with people here, people in Willamette, my old stories from Burgundy, and there's a Burgundian winemaker who's making wines here in Santa Rita Hills. So, they were very precious, their feedback on Pinot and what it's done over the years, and the impact of the film on generally this area, but also on Willamette. So, just we enjoyed writing it.
Well, the story's endured. I mean, there has been no sequel, but there have been international films, Sideways Japan, and a few other films being made.
There was one made in Japan.
Yeah.
I never looked at it. Alexander Payne told me he could take 10 minutes of it and he turned it off.
Yeah.
So I think it was set in Napa, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. There was a Sideways version. They bought the rights to it and they made a Japanese movie out of it.
Somebody's novelizing Sideways.
Well, okay, Rex Pickett, we haven't mentioned him too. Rex Pickett wrote the original novel on which the movie was based. Subsequent to that, he has written 3 more novels with these characters. If you really do want to follow these characters, although I would always claim his characters aren't quite Taylor and Alexander's characters. They're different. They almost seem to be the same guy. I don't know, somehow there's nothing much distinguishes one from the other because they're both chasing booze, chasing wine, chasing women. His second novel was called Vertigo. That's Sideways Vertigo. And it's kind of it's always about him. It's about the story of how he got sober, and also the story about his mother who had a major stroke, and he had to take care of her for the last few years of his life. He imagined them getting on a road trip where they had a van outfitted so her wheelchair could go into the van. And she had a Filipino maid coming, a caretaker with her. And the 4 of them go out to the McMinnville in the Willamette Valley for what do they call that Pinot Noir event?
International Pinot Noir.
International Pinot Noir, which they've stopped. They stopped as of this year. And then after that, it's just he and his mother driving her to her sister's home in the Midwest I think, Wisconsin, and resolving a lot of angst between them over the years. It's a kind of a serious book, and it's a true sequel, and that characters are continuing on. They're not just repeating themselves. That's a serious book. Then he wrote one in Chile because the government persuaded him to come down and write a book. That is to say, the Chilean viticulturists did.
Yeah.
And so they kind of let him, they comped him to come down and write a book about Chile. But there's not much Pinot Noir there, so it has to be about Sauvignon Blanc and some other wines.
Yeah.
His least successful, I'm sure he would agree, book, because he ran into a lot of people nostalgic for the days of Pinochet down there, the ruthless dictator. And he didn't feel like, since he was on the government dime, I guess it would be pesos, to be too critical about the country. So he kind of pulled his punches and he didn't talk about it too much. But subsequent, and what he got published last year was the one in New Zealand. So he's taken, and where it is Pinot country, and he's in a caravan, well, we call it what, a motorhome, going to the two islands, and all the problems with the caravan, and you've read it, I haven't.
It's funny,
Is
and it's
it?
good.
Really?
Yeah.
So he's
Sideways New
continued the
Zealand.
characters.
Yeah.
They must be, they're almost middle-aged when they
Yeah.
wrote the novel, so 20 years later, I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good.
the last one's
yeah.
going to be the old age home, I think. How it,
Chasing women there.
and chasing
I don't know.
women, and,
A lot of them can't walk very fast. They got the walk.
You're right.
Easier to chase.
It's a little tray here. Hey, I have my own cocktail table here.
He also has a theater version. He did a version of a play that played in the Santa Monica airport. There was a playhouse there, and it has since played in Spain, in London, and Latvia, right?
Oh.
And it's still playing in Latvia. Who knew? And so he's got this, and he's got a musical version of it now.
Yeah, that happened in Sonoma. I think.
And they sang it in Sonoma. They sang 14 or 15 songs. They didn't stage it, so it has never been staged, and they're still working on that. But it did get staged down in San Diego too. So it is, I think, Japan. So it has made
Well,
a circle.
yeah, the thing is, Sideways, the book, the story, the enigma of Sideways just continues. I mean, look at us. We've done a book. We never thought of doing it. It just happened. As I said, things are just organically happening with this phenomenon. Who knows who will come with another book or a movie or a documentary? I don't know.
Well, we're certainly glad, Kirk, Mira, Advani, Honeycutt,
Thank
we're certainly
you.
glad that you did continue the tradition. Thank you again for coming.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Michael, and thank you, Foster. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.